All right, so we are good. So welcome everybody to another episode here of my deconstruction series. Really excited to have Johanan Raatz here on the call with me. Johanan and I have been talking for a couple years, and I got connected to him on some of his videos and just his work on quantum physics and idealism specifically, which we'll talk more about. But actually, Johanan, I don't know if you remember this. I discovered you through JP Moreland. I was listening to, it was actually William Lane Craig, and I was interested in looking into just the soul. And so I discovered JP Moreland and then came across Mike Jones and then came across you and then we connected, and I've kind of gotten into the whole thing with Bernardo Castro.
That's what. So how did JP Moreland lead you to me? That's interesting.
Well, I think I saw some videos. I think Mike Inspiring Philosophy, I think those were the first videos I saw. And I was trying to figure out, because Mike used to be kind of introverted about letting people know who he was. Well, he's probably still that way. But I couldn't discover who was making the videos, and I was trying to connect, and he did a video with you, and so you and I connected, and then found out that he got most of his information on idealism from you. Isn't that right?
Yep. I was the guy who converted Inspiring Philosophy to idealism.
Yeah.
I'm also the guy who invented the digital physics argument, which is kind of now branched into sort of two separate arguments, but it's evolutionary divergence, you might say. But yeah.
Right. Well, so we connected that way, but
as well as the perspective argument.
Yeah. Well, you just told me that JP Moreland invited you to come.
Oh, that's right. Yep.
Yeah. And so that was the connection. So do you want to talk a little bit about that and just tell everybody a little bit about your background? I know you were raised fundamentalist like I was too, but just you want to tell people about your degree and kind of JP Moreland and your connection to all of this?
Yeah, so I started my physics degree. My first was my physics degree, my undergrad. I got that, and I was trolling YouTube atheists with this at the time, right? Because I always saw this like a big problem on YouTube, and I'm like, I can just pull the rug out on them. And I recognized from way back that the science versus religion debate was not really a science versus religion debate. It was a materialism versus dualism debate, and they're both wrong for different reasons, equal and opposite reasons. I recognize the metaphysical implications of it too, because I had already come to a conclusion that reality was information way back, like when I was like 15 years old, based on certain just philosophical arguments I was coming to on my own. Mm-hmm. And I recognized, the physicists are saying the same thing in a different way. And I'm like, well, that's interesting. We're saying it for a completely different set of reasons, but they're coming to the same conclusion. And so then I put those together, and then it already was idealism in a certain sense, but I did not think of it as idealism because at the time, when you first run into idealism, it's like you almost get this impression of life is but a dream. You're like, well, that's ridiculous. That can't be right. But it's actually a bit more than that. I mean, there's an objective structure there. That objective structure is not material. It's made of mental items. Back then, hardly anyone was that. It was so rarefied that it was like, does that even exist? It's like,
right. Well, since we're already saying idealism, my viewers, most of them probably have no idea what it is. I would assume that most of the people watching my channel are dualists. Can you give like a description of idealism for dummies?
So materialism is the view where everything is matter. Mind arises from matter. Dualism is the view that there is separate mind and matter. Idealism is the view that there is only mind, and so what you're seeing as an external world, you think is material, is actually made of mental ontology. So there's something out there, but it's made of mental stuff, basically, minds and ideas. And so, right. A big giant, the world out you see is essentially kind of like a matrix simulation in God's mind.
Right. So cosmic consciousness or God is source, right? And
Yeah.
then the way that I've heard it explained by Bernardo Kastrup is we are basically alters, off of that major source. Is that how you think of it?
Yeah. That'd probably be about right. And like kind of individuates on down.
Okay. Yeah, to me, I mean, this just helped me make so much more sense of not only consciousness, but just our connection to the divine. Can you explain just again for dummies how idealism relates to quantum physics? What has quantum physics shown us that's just grounded idealism?
Quantum mechanics, what they've basically been showing is that the particle actually does not have defined properties before you look at it. And they were assuming, well, it really does have defined properties before you look at it, but there are these hidden variables that we're not seeing that are causing it this way, and we're not just able to predict it yet, right?
Right. Well, yeah, let's talk about that for a second. So all these experiments, what they're seeing is that like the double slit experiment, for example, where they fire the electron through a double slit, that when it's not being observed, in a sense, it's behaving like a wave. When it's being observed, it's behaving like an electron. And when they hit the backboard, right, the wave, when they're behaving like a wave and no one's observing, the backboard actually looks different than when the electrons are being observed, and they're basically looking like the double slit that they're getting shot through. These all demonstrate that it's actually conscious observation that is the catalyst, right?
It's measurement that is the catalyst. Right. And so the key here is it's not that only mind can collapse wave functions, okay? It's that everything can collapse a wave function, like everything can do a measurement. It can cause an interaction, but a mind exists, right? I mean, that's the thing that you can't doubt, that does not, you can't doubt that exists, right? That's literally the one thing you cannot doubt in the world that exists. So therefore, the mind is a thing. And if things in general cause collapse or measurement, that means that the mind can do measurement as well. It just follows logically. And so, like, I've seen people fumble this so many times to try and say, well, it's not really, the mind doesn't do it because it's the measuring apparatus. Like, yes. And who measures the measuring apparatus, dummy? They did have this stupid double standard with,
Exactly. Right. I mean, but for the sake of simplicity, the conclusion is that the electron is not there until it's being observed, in a sense, correct?
Yeah. Yep.
And so the conclusion, therefore, is that mind is actually more fundamental than whatever we describe as the materials that we're observing.
Yeah.
And that's essentially what idealism is, as I understand it. It's just that consciousness is actually fundamental. And even though that's counterintuitive to our experience because of how we've learned to interpret and move around in the world.
Yeah, it's literally built into our psychology to see the world not that way. Like it's like it's a biological thing, but yeah, it's not that way.
Yeah, our language and everything.
I mean, in 1905, actually, I think it was a little after that because they did the experimental confirmation of it a little bit later. But you had special relativity, and before that, we had a very strong intuition that the A theory of time was true. Well, the A theory of time is not true. We found that time is the flow of time rather is an illusion. I mean, time is real, but it's like it's more of a not completely spatial because it has slightly different math, but it's it's like a film strip basically.
Right.
So that's the case of our intuition being just plain wrong, and this is another case of, well, once again, your intuition is just plain wrong. So.
Right. So that's the main thing I wanted to get at. Is just the basics of idealism is that, I think your approach to it and the way that you've looked at this the last couple of years is in reference to materialism, which is pervasive, obviously, on the atheist side of things. But what you run up against with materialism is the hard problem of consciousness, which essentially is, why are neurons in our brain equating to consciousness? There are other analogies for neurons all throughout the world, but those things are not conscious. So why is our experience conscious? Why, speaking of qualia and how we experience colors and relationships and just in reality, there's a big disconnect. Anyone can Google the hard problem of consciousness and find out more about this. But there's a big disconnect between what we experience and matter itself.
Yeah, well, I mean, matter is little billiard balls. Like it's and they're completely non-mental. They're physical. I mean, supposedly, if we all died tomorrow, they'd still just be there, and it would have this existence that has nothing to do with mind in any respect. And so, yet supposedly, mind arises from it. I mean, like, well, it has no mental properties of any kind, no qualia by itself. That's your perceptions, no intentions, no thoughts, etc. Nothing about it is mind-like. Well, how are you supposed to get mind out of that?
Right.
And it's not like mind reduces. You can't take your thoughts and you try and, here's an example. Try and reduce your thoughts for a moment, to conceptually reduce your thoughts to matter for a second. You see what's wrong with that statement is that anytime you try and conceptually reduce it, well, you're going to think of more thoughts, aren't you?
Yep.
It's literally, you say conceptually, well, it is a concept, it's a thought. So you have to conceptually reduce the concepts. Well, they only reduce the more concepts all the way down. You can't get any material out of that at all.
So yeah, okay, well, that's good enough. I just wanted kind of a general basic overview of idealism. And, for anybody out there watching, I remember the first time I was trying to take in the idea that consciousness was fundamental. Your intuition really fights against that. And so it took me probably a good 12 months to make sense of reality as a whole within this new idea that consciousness was fundamental, because you have to rework so much of your experience. You have to rework sense of around everything. And this actually, so this, Johanan, but this is part of my series on deconstruction. And there's this psychological idea of splinters. And basically what splinters are is more of a subconscious thing that happens in your mind where you see an inconsistency in your belief system. For you and I, it's fundamentalism. That's what we were raised in. But once you have enough of those splinters, you really have to question the whole system. You have to step back and kind of deconstruct from that system. Idealism and quantum physics and everything we're talking about, it was a big splinter for me, because what I started to see, and you talk about this a lot in your content, is that spirituality is a lot deeper than the fundamentalism we were taught. So I wanted to ask you, you talk about this idea of what you call cargo cults. Can you explain what you mean by that, and talk about how these supposed religious containers, as it were, point to something deeper than what we were raised in?
Yeah, with cargo cult. So now the cargo cult, an example of this would be in World War II, they had Air Force pilots that were flying over Polynesian islands who would then drop cargo on, because they have to drop cargo to their allies, right? Well, soldiers fighting World War II are not the only people who live in Polynesian islands. You also have tropical rainforest savages living on, I know that's not politically correct, but it's kind of a funny example here, who also live there. And they see the airplanes, right? But they've never seen an airplane before because they don't have technology. They're living in basically what you would think of as the Stone Age, right?
Right.
Well, they see that. They see an airplane in the sky. What do they think of an airplane?
It's magic.
It's magic, right?
Yeah.
And, well, they have these funny radios, right? They pull their ham radios out and they see them talking to, or maybe they turn the channel on and they hear, well, your dead ancestors, right? You're channeling your dead. They call it a spirit box. You're channeling your dead ancestors on the spirit box. Dead ancestors such as Elvis Presley and the Beatles and Tupac, for
Right.
example, right? Kind of funny example there, right? Yeah,
Right.
those are sure dead ancestors, all right. Listening to them on the radio. And so then what happened was you had this situation. Yeah, I know, it's hilarious. You have the situation where you had witch doctors from these tribes who would start new religions, worshiping the tall white gods who came out of the airplanes. And also they would then take cardboard, pieces of cardboard, and they put them together and they'd like tape aluminum foil on top of the box, right?
Yep.
And now they're going to start trying to listen very closely to this special little box they made with an aluminum foil sticking out. Treating it very seriously, trying to channel the spirits of their dead ancestors on this special totem they made out of cardboard with an aluminum foil antenna on top, which they now call a spirit box, right? Which is hilarious because it's like a total joke of the whole thing. It's they see this and they're like, well, what is that?
Right. So essentially, what you're getting at is the fact that a cargo cult is an analogy for maybe a denomination or a religious perspective that is describing what we're talking about in idealism in a very rudimentary way, but it's very partial in a sense. It's not giving us as good or as conscious of a perspective of reality as if we just go to the source. Is that right?
Yeah, exactly. And it's funny because that's just physics to me. I don't believe that in the sense of something believed on faith. With the Trinity, for me, it's no different in kind than believing that the sky is blue or believing that the photoelectric effect is real. And for the same reason, it literally is just science to me.
Right. Well, and that's what I'm trying to get at here is that I think the thing that I'm digging into with fundamentalism, and that I'm talking about just in deconstruction in general, is fundamentalism is a psychological issue. It's a need to have simple answers that somebody at a certain stage can process in their brain, right? Like these cargo cults. And so the point of getting into that.
Notice how childlike it is. It's ridiculous.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
And
so it literally is. It's kind of funny because it literally is a primitive view of. I mean, you think, we live in the West. We're no different than the people in Polynesia, right? The jungle savages in Polynesia, right? Well, not really. We just do it at a grander scale in a grander way.
Right. And it's ultimately what I'm discovering is I do a lot of research on psychology.
Trinity is magic. Well, yeah. The airplane is magic. Our cargo cult has officially said that this airplane flies by ways beyond our comprehension and cannot be known by the mind of man except through faith and revelation from the tall white gods who come out of the airplanes. No, I'm just going to set up a shop here and start teaching avionics, right? And they become really uncomfortable when you do that because now they look like idiots.
Right. And so I think this is a good segue into kind of the next thing. I think what quantum physics did or idealism did for me is it opened the door to allow me to look outside of Christianity for universal truths about God, right? Mm-hmm. You can look at New Age spirituality. You can look at Buddhism. You can look at these different religions. And even though that's anathematized in fundamentalism, no, they're doctrines of demons, right? Same thing as the cargo cultists would say, right? But what idealism shows us is that there is something deeper that's connecting all of humanity to this cosmic consciousness. And everybody's trying to explain it in a little bit of a different way. Some explanations are better than others. But the biggest thing I'm combating in my deconstruction is the fucking fundamentalists who want to see it in one way. And if you change their views at all, you're cast out of that tribe. it's just it's cargo cultism. It really is. That's why I asked you
Well,
about this, because
those evil heretics on on the neighboring island over there, they believe the tall white gods flew in helicopters rather than airplanes. We have to go burn them at the stake.
Right. Right. It's bullshit.
And you have you ever notice this? Kind of funny because this is another cargo cult, for example, but it's pretty funny because they kind of have an intuition of this, but they're not able to prove it, right? And they don't know the basis for this. Ever hear of a New Ager talk about low vibrations?
Yep.
Or high vibrations? You have to vibrate higher or vibrate lower. It's kind of irritating because it sounds like it's usually associated with kind of fluffy New Age kind of stuff, right?
Yep.
And, well, they don't know why that is. I know why that is, though. Okay? Energy can be translated into Shannon information, okay? Now, when you increase the amount of energy, aka Shannon information, which is integrated, entanglement that becomes integrated information or consciousness, you put that into a wave function, okay? The Schrodinger equation, they increase the energy in there, which is increasing information. Well, that shows up in the K value of your wave function. The K is the frequency or frequency of vibration. And you have more vibrations if you have a higher K value.
Yep.
Well, there you
more
go.
Consciousness.
More consciousness will give you higher vibrations.
Yep.
I mean, it's kind of sounds corny because it's when you hear someone say that, it's like fingernails on a chalkboard. Oh, that irritating New Age bullshit. Like, no, that's physics.
I know, but
that is physics.
Idealism is the reason I was able to learn from New Age philosophy, because I was sourcing it in all of what you're talking about. And it finally made sense to me what they were talking about. Well, I've got to finish up here, Johanan. How can people find you?
My channel, Johanan Raatz.
Okay, your YouTube channel.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Thank you so much for spending some time with me. I'm going to stay on here for a little bit and just go over a couple points and do kind of a little conclusion here. All right. So real quick, I'm just going to close this out. Johanan is really, really smart. Definitely check out his channel. He's got a lot of good resources on there on idealism, so you can dig more into this. If you want something that's a little bit more digestible, that is kind of more for dummies, if you YouTube inspiring philosophy, idealism, or I think one of the videos is called God of the Matrix. I'll link these in the description too. You'll get more of a basic framework of what idealism is. But basically the main thing that I was hoping to get at with Johanan is there is an underlying spirituality deeper than fundamentalism, and it's universal. And it comes from the fact that we are all connected to God in a sense. We are not God, but we are of him. Our consciousness is derived from his consciousness, and we are fragments of that. But in fundamentalism, there's a big chasm between our identity and God's identity. And in what we're talking about, that chasm is not as big as it often is made to be seen. And that's one of the things I'm trying to really work against in this episode, is that when we look at the deepest level of science in quantum physics, quantum is the study of the smallest building blocks of matter. And what we see when we study those building blocks is that they are interacting with our consciousness in a way where consciousness is directing our entire reality. We think of our intuitions tell us that it's the opposite, that we are subject to this material world. We are subjective. The material world is objective, where in idealism, it's actually the opposite. The material world is a subjective projection of our objective consciousness, which is based on cosmic consciousness. And so the main thing, and this has contributed to my deconstruction, is that things are very nuanced. They're not as simple as they're fed to you in fundamentalism. And so this is just another great example of that. So I hope this got your brain turning a little bit. Again, Johanan covered a lot of shit. So check out his channel if you want more information. But there's something deeper. And this is a great example of why fundamentalism doesn't practically work in reality. There's a lot of different religions in the world that are picking up on these connections between us and God. And those are some of the things I'm digging through in my deconstruction journey. I still most closely identify with Christianity, definitely not in a fundamentalist or, Protestant, necessarily Reformed sense anymore. Because I think, again, there's just a lot more nuance there. So hopefully this was fun to listen to. I know it's a lot of information, but thankful that Johanan came on, and I'll see you guys next time. Have a good night.